A lot is happening in the world. I cannot believe some of the things that I have read over the last several days that is in relation to the nation of Israel. Here we are in studio, God and Country, episode 4. I have in studio Reed. Mr. Reed, sir, good to have you today.
Thanks, Dan. Good to be back.
Man, I missed you last week. And I know that your grandfather had a heart attack, and I'm thankful that he's doing better. And we've been praying for him, and man, I missed you, but I'm glad that you're with us. I'm glad that you're with us today. How's he doing today?
He's doing a lot better. He's back home. He's in pretty high spirits. Saw him every day this week. So, yeah.
Good deal. Reed, last week, we've been talking over the last several weeks, we've been talking and discussing about Christians being engaged in the political arena. As we look around at the nation and the direction of the nation, it is quite clear that there are so many Christians that are just disengaged. That they used to be engaged, but they're no longer engaged. And I really dove into that last week. And, when talking about the importance of Christians engaging, staying engaged, and re-engaging in the political arena. And I think that's important on so many levels, not just in D.C. So many people are paying attention, especially what's happening in the nation of Israel. So many people are paying attention, about what is going on, over there with these hundreds of missiles and these drones that have been sent to attack and destroy, the nation of Israel. And, last week or the week before, I mentioned about Roe versus Wade and how Roe was overturned and how because of that, Donald Trump had nominated, 3 different pro-life Supreme Court, justices to the bench. And because of that, Roe was overturned. Also, something that a lot of people forget about whenever Donald Trump was in office was that he declared Jerusalem as being the capital, moved the embassy to Jerusalem. And that's something a lot of people forget about. Bush said he would do that. He didn't do it. Obama said he would do it, and he didn't do it. And I'm not even sure Biden knows that Jerusalem is in Israel.
I don't think he knows where Jerusalem is.
He might think that's like the capital of California.
Yeah.
I'm not sure he knows that Jerusalem is in, Israel. But Donald Trump, he named several things that he was going to do. He said, I'm going to move, Jerusalem. I'm going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and we're going to make that the capital. And he did it. And just as support, that Donald Trump had for the nation of Israel, it, to me, is amazing. And I really appreciate that about Donald Trump. I appreciate several things about Trump, but that is one thing that I really appreciate about him. What are your thoughts on the embassy being moved to Jerusalem? We'll get more into what's happening in the conflict today, but what are your thoughts on that in particular?
That was one of Donald Trump's finer moments. I remember that he got a lot of praise for that, and I think rightfully so. It was definitely the right move, and as you said, Trump was fulfilling a promise that many other presidents, made, and then fell through on, both Republican and Democrat, right? So I've spent a lot of time thinking about what's happening between Israel and Iran over the last several days, and I think one thing we can confidently say on the note about Donald Trump is you might have mean tweets if Donald Trump were president right now, but you wouldn't have this looming possibility of World War III. I think that this is because of the stupidity and the incompetency of the Biden administration. And I think that if for whatever reason Biden or the Democratic Party retakes power again for this upcoming election, I don't see any scenario where we don't have World War III.
I agree, and I also would say the same thing about Russia invading Ukraine. I don't think that if Donald Trump was president of the United States of America right now, Russia would have never invaded Ukraine. We would have that war going on in Ukraine right now. I mean, everything was really quiet whenever Trump, was president. Of course, here in America, the Democrats are doing everything they could to burn down every city they possibly could, creating all kind of riots and trying to burn cities. And then, of course, COVID come and all those things happen. But when you look at the world, Russia would never have invaded Ukraine. You would have this war happening between Hamas and Israel, and now Iran, shooting all of these missiles and these drones toward Israel. I like what Benjamin Netanyahu said. Benjamin Netanyahu said this, and I agree 100% with what he said. He said, Israel is not what is wrong with the Middle East. Israel is what is right about the Middle East. And that was a quote that Benjamin Netanyahu made about the nation of Israel. And, whenever you look at that statement and you see what's happening around, not just in Israel, but you see what's happening around the nation of Israel, I agree with that statement that Israel is what is right about the Middle East. And I think that the United States of America protecting and helping and fighting for the nation of Israel, I think is a wise thing. And I have a friend who was at, his name is Amon, and he is actually, him and his parents were on a plane. They flew to Turkey, and they spent several days in Turkey, and they was on a plane flying to Iraq. They were flying to Baghdad, Iraq, Saturday night when all of this broke loose. And so they had to turn their plane around and go back to Turkey, or they would have been probably stranded in the nation of Iraq. But anyway, I said that to say I'm thankful that they're doing okay and that they were able to get back to Turkey. But I agree with Benjamin Netanyahu whenever he made that statement, because whenever you look at the Middle East and you look at what's happening in all parts of the world, there's just a lot of craziness out there. I mean, a lot of crazy things are happening, with some of these leaders of some of these countries, especially whenever you look at the country of Iran. We were talking a little bit, before we got on the show about Iran and some of the things that have taken place back in the 50s, and then, of course, in the 70s, and then even to today. Right. And so let's talk a little bit about that before we jump into the nation of Israel. Let's go back to, you were talking about the 50s. Let's go back and talk about what was taking place in the 1950s.
Well, you said that, the thing that's right, or Benjamin Netanyahu said that the thing that is right with the Middle East is Israel. The thing that is wrong with the Middle East is the U.S. government, right? Well, when we look at the state of affairs, it really can be traced back to the CIA, the same government organization that killed John F. Kennedy. So in 1953, this is history that I've had a great time, teaching my family about over the last couple of Thanksgiving dinners. And whenever you tell them this, is wow, I didn't know that, right? What a lot of people don't know is that until 1953, what is now Iran was called Persia back then, and it was a thriving parliamentary, we could call it a parliamentary democracy, with a form of government pretty similar to ours, but for the most part more similar to that of the United Kingdom, right? When we look at Persia back then, prior to 1953, you didn't have women who were being forced to cover their faces. They weren't being forced to. You had women who were dressing like other Western women. I mean, you had a lifestyle over there and a culture that was very close to the one that we enjoy here in this country. However, prior to 1953, this actually goes back to World War II. I'm gonna take us back a little bit, because there's no way that I can dive into this without going a little bit further back in history.
History is always good.
History is always good. I love history. That's my academic background. Yeah. So to put it simply, Arabian oil was actually under the control of the British government. Arabian oil was under the control of the U.S. government. Persian oil was under the control of the British government prior to this point. So you had almost all the oil in Persia at that point that was being taken by the Western world, by the British government, by the U.S. government. And the Persian people were pretty unhappy about this because they were living in absolute squalor. They were living on top of land that was theirs ancestrally. They were living on top of an ocean of petroleum, some of the finest petroleum in the world. But it was being drilled by a company called BP, British Petroleum, right? That's actually the namesake of the company BP that we know more commonly today. This is its origins. It's British Petroleum. It was drilling oil in Persia and other parts of the Middle East all the way back then, basically stealing oil from people during that time. So the Persian people, they elect a prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh, right, to be their prime minister, and he gets elected on a promise of keeping more of the oil of Persia in Persia, right? Cutting back on how much of that oil is being exported to the Western world, keeping it in Persia so that the Persian people can enjoy it. Well, a new government agency called the CIA didn't enjoy that very much. The first director of the CIA was actually the nephew of Theodore Roosevelt. His name was Kermit Roosevelt. Eisenhower was the president of the United States at this time. Eisenhower, being the former commander of the Allied forces, the supreme commander of the Allied forces during World War II, he was actually a pretty anti-war president for the most part. He's one of the more anti-war presidents we've had, not nearly as pro-war as many other presidents we've had throughout the 20th and 21st century. So whenever the CIA gets into Eisenhower's head, they're trying to destabilize Iran and bring about a regime in Iran that's going to be more favorable to American and British interests. Outright war with Iran is never going to work with Eisenhower, because Eisenhower does not want another all-out war, especially just as we're 8 years out of World War II. So something that you can sell Eisenhower on, however, are covert operations, black operations, and they're also a lot cheaper than full-scale wars. So Eisenhower signed off on a coup in Tehran, the capital of Iran, in 1953, the U.S. government and the British government funded several mass protests, riots across the city of Tehran to destabilize the city, destabilize the government of Iran or Persia at that time, and illegally impose the Shah. Okay, so we've heard of the Shah. This is something that the Shah, Americans tend to know a little bit more than they know of Mohammad Mossadegh, right? It's more recent history. So the Shah, that is just the Persian word for a king. Reza Pahlavi, he was the son of a former king who had been exiled by that point. So the Pahlavi dynasty had been exiled for several decades and was replaced by a parliamentary democracy that lasted until 1953, whenever we overthrew that government, right? So the CIA and the British government illegally impose Reza Pahlavi, a king. Let's think about this very quickly. Let's unpack what just happened here. Our foundation story, our great foundational myth, so to speak, of the United States is that it is true, we declared independence from a monarchy, right? And we established a republic here. What kind of subversion is it of our foundational story that we overthrew a parliamentary democracy in another part of the world and replaced it with a king? Think about that. Let's really unpack that.
Yeah, that'll
for a
make a
second.
lot of sense.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. I think that really helps illustrate just how far we have fallen from the original vision that the founding fathers had for this country, right? So in 1953, we illegally impose Reza Pahlavi, the Shah, this new king of Iran, descended from a long line of exiled Persian kings. Reza Pahlavi remained in power from 1953 until 1979, which you just alluded to, the Iranian Revolution. So in 1953, the United States government and the British government illegally imposed this new Shah, right, descended from a long line of Persian kings after overthrowing a parliamentary democracy. Once again, let's think about what kind of subversion that is of our foundational story. We are a country that declared independence from a monarch, from a king, built a republic in place of where the colonies were. Fast forward to the 20th century, 1953, we're doing the exact opposite in another part of the world. So this new Shah, Reza Pahlavi, he remains in power from 1953 to 1979. Now, it is true that Reza Pahlavi was generally pro-Western in the sense that he was in favor of whatever the CIA's agenda happened to be at the time. He was given a great degree of autonomy as to how he could govern Iran. So 1953, it's important to know, that's whenever the country ceased to be known as Persia and became known as Iran, which is actually an ancient Arabic word for that land. So whenever we overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh and replaced him with the Shah, that's whenever the country's identity was explicitly changed from Persia to Iran at that point, right? So Reza Pahlavi remains in power until 1979. While he is pro-Western, he also engages in dramatic human rights abuses. So there was actually a torture campaign called SAVAK, S-A-V-A-K, against young college students, for the most part, who were in the streets of Tehran and in other cities across Iran, who were protesting, the atrocities of the Shah's government, right? It was pretty brutal. I don't want to go into too much detail about that, but it was pretty brutal how Reza Pahlavi treated his own people, throughout that 26-year time period. But what we can learn from this chapter of history is that people are not going to tolerate a foreign government being imposed upon them for too long. So the CIA, with the help of the British government, overthrows Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953, and they imposed a new government that was not bound to last. Can you imagine if China or if Russia imposed some foreign government that was completely against our values here in America? How long would that last? It wouldn't last that long, right? So this was an untenable situation that the CIA brought about in 1953. So what happens? Well, 1979, the Iranian Revolution happens. That's actually how we got Ayatollah Khomeini coming into power. And that's where the Islamic Republic, the so-called Islamic Republic of Iran that we are dealing with today, first started. So when we talk about Israel, it's really the greatest place in the Middle East where everyday freedom can exist, right? It's certainly the freest part of the Middle East in a lot of senses, which is not a very high bar to set, if we're being frank. freest place in the Middle East. A big deal, right? The Middle East is pretty backwards, pretty broken, so on and so forth, right? But whenever it comes to everything that's wrong with the Middle East, so much of it really can be traced back to the CIA. And that's why, while I believe, supporting Israel in several different capacities, the most important thing that I think we as Americans should be putting out there is that the CIA cannot be allowed to get involved in this ordeal between Israel and Iran. We have to keep the U.S. government, particularly under the Biden administration, separated from this. But that does not mean that we as Christians should totally withdraw ourselves from the conflict.
I agree 100%. You're talking about Persia, right? And how when you go to the Bible, it's amazing how you can go to the Bible, the Old Testament, and you can start reading and you can start seeing like some of these names pop up in the Bible. Because a lot of people want to act like, we're going to somehow have peace in the Middle East. Like that's going to happen. But I've got news for everybody that's watching this show, and I hate to tell you this, but we will never experience peace in the Middle East until after the rapture of the church. And we're not going to get into all of that today, but there will be peace. But that's going to be during that first 3 years, that first 3.5 years of the tribulation period. There will be peace. There'll be world peace that first 3.5 years. Until then, listen, they've been fighting in Israel and Iran, Persia, Turkey, Egypt. They've been fighting. It goes all the way back to all the way back to Genesis, with Abraham and Isaac, and it goes back all the way to there. And even in Daniel 5, the Bible talks about whenever King Nebuchadnezzar came in with Babylon, and they took a lot of the Israelis back to Babylon. And I know many people might not be familiar with the story, but in Daniel 5, the king had taken a lot of the cupware and a lot of the drinking utensils out of the temple. The gold and the silver, the real fine, the fine dining, I guess you could say. And the king was using that, as far as drinking from that. And the Bible tells about a story how a hand appeared and started writing on the wall. And what that writing was, and only Daniel could interpret it. And what that writing basically was, it was letting the king know of Babylon that, listen, your kingdom is about to fall. And it's going to be the Persians that are going to come in that are going to overtake this kingdom. And so that's exactly what was taking place. And so that was back in Daniel 5. And then in Ezra, the Bible talks more about the Iran. We're talking about Persia. And so this what's happening in Iran, it's not anything new. It didn't start in the 1950s. I understand exactly what you're saying, and I agree with you about, how the CIA came in and they overthrew and all that. But this has been happening and going all the way back to the Old Testament for thousands of years. And so this conflict that is happening is something that has happened for a very long time. Back with Daniel, in the Bible, it goes back to Abraham, with Isaac, with Ishmael. That's where it really all starts. Back with whenever Sarah got Abraham to lie with Hagar because she wanted a child, and God told him, we're going to give you one, and they're 90 years old, and still they hadn't had no child. And so Abraham's wife gets him to lie with their handmaid Hagar, and they have Ishmael, and then Ishmael and Isaac are fighting, and so Abraham makes Hagar and Ishmael leave, and so that's what this all goes back to. I mean, honestly, if you want to look at the foundation of all of this that's happening in the Middle East, look at it from a biblical viewpoint, and you go all the way back to the Old Testament. And let me just throw this in there too, because I just like this, being the fact that I just like studying the Bible. As people try to disprove the Bible, because there's a lot of people out there that will let it try to disprove the Bible. If you could disprove the Bible, then all you have to do is go back. If the Bible is so inaccurate, right? If there's so many inaccuracies in the Bible, well, let's start in the Old Testament. Go to the Old Testament and just start pointing them out. There's names, there's places that are mentioned in the Old Testament, and if the Bible is so untrue, then let's go start in the Old Testament and let's just start pointing out the problems, and let's start pointing out the discrepancies. And the issue is you can't find any. I mean, the Bible is right on target. It is 100% just accurate, right on. And so when you look at what's happening in the world today, all you got to do is follow the Bible. And all of the Bible is, it's a history book. That's what the Bible is. It's telling his story. It's telling God's story. And it goes back to creation, and then it gets into the nation of Israel, and then it gets into all the way down to the New Testament with the crucifixion of Christ on the cross, and then it gets into the epistles with Paul's letters, to the church that comes to us here, that we're in the church age today. And then it even talks about the end times. And so, the Bible is just so full of great information, of great history that we can learn from. And so what's happening in the Middle East is nothing new, right? It's nothing new. They've been fighting for a long time, and they're going to keep fighting, and they're going to be fighting a long time after. But I'm with you that I think that America...
the problems we face today don't begin in 1953 by any stretch of the imagination. It's absolutely true that conflict has been there for thousands of years. So when we look at the Islamic religion, which obviously didn't come along until the early 7th century, it is a violent religion.
Absolutely.
It is a religion that encourages its followers to engage in conquest, right?
Absolutely.
To force, the non-believers, even people, so-called people of the book, Christians and Jews, to submit, to pay taxes to their Islamic authorities, right?
Correct.
So, that's what we're talking about, is we're dealing, it is an ideology, particularly the Shia form of Islam, which dominates Iran, right? Which dominates our current culture, which is the official religion of the so-called Islamic Republic. It is an inherently violent and expansionistic religion. There is an historical parallel that I do like to point to with all of that said, however. So whenever we understand just how unstable the Middle East is in the 20th century, the 21st century, I do think there's one historical comparison that can be rightfully made. Think about how broken Western Europe was after the Roman Empire fell in the late 5th century, right? You had, there was no unifying government there to keep the Franks, the Brits, Hispania, parts of Italy, all of these parts of the Western Empire together. Whenever they collapsed, that was the beginning of the Dark Ages. That's whenever we began to see the rise of feudalism. That was whenever we began to see tribalism on a local level. We saw smaller states competing against each other. That's, in a sense, where the Middle East is today, because they lost the Ottoman Empire after World War I, right? Obviously, the Ottomans, they sided with the Germans and the Central Powers in World War I. The Ottoman Empire, for several hundred years, they were an enemy of Christendom, and I could spend several episodes talking about that. They were an enemy of Christendom, but they were an empire. They were a political sort of adhesive that kept all of these various regions, Turkey, modern-day Iran, Arabia, so on and so forth. They kept them from warring against each other. They lost their empire at the end of World War II in the same way that we lost, so to speak, our empire in the late 5th century that kept Western Europe, from fighting one another. So I think that, once again, look at the 100 years or so immediately after the collapse of the Roman Empire. I think that's probably where the Middle East is in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agree. When we talk about the nation of Israel, it's not a very big place, right?
No.
It's a very, very small place. So if you take the bottom of Mississippi and the bottom...
You mean the landmass, right?
Yeah, the landmass. The landmass between Alabama and Louisiana. That's right. And so you take the bottom of Mississippi. We're about 73, 74 miles wide, right? From if you go down I-10, from Louisiana, from Slidell to Mobile area, that landmass, we're about 73 miles. Well, Israel is only about 85 miles wide. At their widest point, they're 85 miles. Their shortest point is about 7 miles, 7 to 9 miles. So it's not a very large country in width. And then the length of it is only about 265 miles. And so from Gulfport, from Highway 90, which is on the very bottom of Gulfport, the very bottom of Mississippi, all the way to Jackson is about 160 miles. So from where we're sitting right here, we're about 155 miles from Jackson. So Israel is only about 260 miles wide. So if you go another 100 miles past Jackson, which would get you up probably close to maybe Grenada area, you get about another 100 miles up. That is about the size of
Israel.
That's Israel.
Yeah.
That's it. And so we're talking about a very small landmass, but yet there is so much emphasis on that small country. And you know why?
Well, it's biblical significance.
Absolutely. 100%. That is where it all starts. When you look at Christianity in that little town of Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, that's where it all starts. That's where it all goes back to. When you look at the nation of Israel, people say, why is the nation of Israel so significant? That's where the Messiah came from. Go back from King David, and Solomon and all these kings, and just trace it all the way down to Jesse and And I mean, Jesse to David to Solomon, and then all those kings that came in after, all the way to Joseph, right, to Mary, Jesus's earthly parents. You trace that all the way to that little town of Bethlehem where Jesus was born. Satan, man, last week you talked about, or 2 weeks ago, you mentioned about how you have a lot of satanic emphasis and satanic influence right here in America. Could you only imagine what that influence is like in a country like Iran?
Absolutely.
A country like Baghdad, Iraq, Afghanistan, and some of these places, Turkey and Egypt, some of these places that have always, from the very beginning. Look at Adolf Hitler and what he was trying to do. Trying to just wipe out, the Jewish people. There's always been a hatred for those people, always, and it goes back to and this is going to be personal opinion, right? It all goes back to, in my personal opinion, Satan hates that nation. Satan hates those people, and why is it? Because they gave us the Messiah. They gave us the one. If you go to Genesis and look at Genesis, where the Bible talks about how that through the woman's seed that Satan's head was going to be bruised.
Genesis 3:15.
Absolutely. So whenever you look at that, whenever they were in the garden, right after Eve sinned, or Adam and Eve sinned and ate that fruit, and God was he was given their punishment for saying, Adam, you're going to have to work by the sweat of your brow. You have to go to work every day. The thorns are going to prick your fingers. You're going to have to deal with that. Woman, you're going to have to, whenever it comes to give birth, It's going to be bad. My wife has given birth to 5 children. Now, I think that the man has the hard part, personally. As far as we have to be there, we have to be, trying to keep her calm. I remember
I can hear our female audience screaming right now.
So
whenever I hear them through the camera.
I'm sure. So whenever my wife was giving birth to our firstborn equipment, and I'll never forget, man, I was popping her toes, and she was getting so aggravated with me, and I was just a young kid, didn't know anything, and I was like, babe, will you be quiet? I'm trying to watch ESPN, I had the football game on. It was on a Sunday, and so, but that's another whole funny story. But it goes back to God looking at Eve. Whenever it comes to birth, you're going to travail. It's going to be hard and difficult. And then he said to the serpent, you're going to slither, for the rest of your time. But he said to the serpent that the woman's seed was going to bruise your heel. And so from that day on, man, Satan has had it. He has hated. And that talking about her seed was talking about Jesus and how Jesus was going to bruise his heel. And Jesus did. Jesus did. Jesus was born of Mary, a couple thousand years ago. He lived for 33 and a half years. He died on that old rugged cross. He shed his blood. He rose again on the third day. And so when you look at that, and you go back to the nation of Israel, boy, there's so much hatred there. But let's take it back a little further. Let's say, because I believe that you have satanic control, you have Christ control. You go back a little further to whenever God first kicked Satan out of heaven. Why does God kick Satan out of heaven? The reason he kicked him out of heaven was because of his pride.
Right.
He said, I want to be like God. Satan was whenever people, they put Satan out and he's got this horns on his head, he's got this tail. That's not Satan.
No. He's smart enough to not show up looking like that.
Absolutely. But Satan, I believe, was a beautiful creation. He had the pipes and the music all within him. He had unbelievable talent. Satan had. Lucifer was his name. Lucifer had. And so his pride got to him. I could be like God. I could be more powerful than God. And then God, of course, had to kick him out of heaven. But it goes back to that, where you have the nation of Israel, God's chosen people, and you have Satan want to kill them. Satan want to destroy them. And Satan, how can he do it? He does it through nations. He does it through his people. And I believe this. I believe that God rose up America. God rose up the United States of America. You had some men back in the 1700s that were willing to sail across an ocean and declare independence and tell king to go fly a kite. And we're gonna declare independence. We're gonna set up our own form of government, and we're not gonna pay taxes. And that's another whole issue that we can dive into. And them boys were throwing a fit over maybe a
5% tax on tea. Right.
Yes.
Just this week, half my income got stolen.
Absolutely. Just what I paid for my property tax was almost $3,000.
Oh my
Just for property tax. And then when I look at that property tax, like $1,400 of it went to a school that my children don't even go to.
Oh,
because they go.
criminal.
It's unbelievable. It's out. When I would pay my taxes, I told the lady, I said, I guess we'll never own our property, will we? And she was trying to make an excuse for the taxes. And so, but anyway, let's get back to the nation of Israel. But you're right. 3% or 5% tax, but our founding father said, we're going to declare independence. And then I believe God used America for several things. One, I believe that God has used America to get the gospel out. There's no other country that has spent more money in the area of missions of getting the gospel of Jesus Christ out than any other country in the world if you combine them all and put them all together. The Philippines are starting to catch up with America as far as sending out, as far as sending out missionaries. The Philippines are starting to catch up, but the Philippines use our money. What happens is a lot of these people in foreign countries, our missionaries go over there and people will surrender to the mission field and they'll raise money in America to fund their mission projects. And that happens all the time. They'll come spend 6-7 months in America raising money, send it to a foreign country, to do mission work. And so, but the Philippines are catching up with as far as the number of people that are being sent out. But America still by far gives the most money. And let's take it down even a little further. You know what state in America gives the most money to charity?
Is it ours?
It's ours.
It's ours.
Mississippi.
The state of Mississippi.
The state of Mississippi.
Hospitality state.
As far as when you look at per capita, Mississippi gives the most money, to charity. And a lot of times you consider mission work as far as charity. And so, but my point is simply, God rose up America to get the gospel out. And then I believe another reason is to protect Israel.
Looks like you've been sleeping well.
Megan, he's back. The My Pillow guy.
And you're looking good.
Still feeling good.
Well, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we've got the best pillow ever, My Pillow 2.0.
Wow, it's so soft and smooth.
It's cool to the touch. How did you do that?
Well, we took My Pillow's patented fill and combined it with this new technology that we didn't have back then when I invented My Pillow to bring you the best pillow in history, My Pillow 2.0. Just like all of you, I never imagined that My Pillow could get any better. That's why I haven't changed it in nearly 20 years. Then I heard about a revolutionary new technology, and I knew I had to bring it to you all. My Pillow 2.0 is truly the next generation of My Pillow.
The My Pillow 2.0 is cooler and softer than the last My Pillow. It is so comfortable to sleep on at night. I look forward to going to bed, and I wake up well rested in the morning.
Sleep is all about temperature and height. My Pillow 2.0's patented adjustable fill is going to give you the exact individual support you need from your head to your bed. And now here's where it gets even better. We've all experienced those temperature-related sleep interruptions where you get too hot, you toss and turn, you flip your pillow over to the cool side. Well, all that's gone with my brand new My Pillow 2.0 cooling fabric that's made with temperature-regulating thread.
The best sleep just got even better. Whether you have a MyPillow or not, you need to get the brand new MyPillow 2.0. Call or go to MyPillow.com now. Use your promo code, and for a limited time when you buy one, you'll get a second one absolutely free.
You're sleeping even better.
And cooler, too.
And you're looking good.
Feeling good.
I knew you would.
Visit MyPillow.com.
Oh, that little country. Now, could God do? Yes. Could God protect them on his own? Yes, right? God can do whatever he wants. But God always has an agent. God always uses a man. If you look at the Bible, he always used a man. He used a man to kill Goliath to protect his people. He used David. I mean, all throughout the Bible, God used men. And sometimes God would use wicked kings. God would use people that wasn't even necessarily Christian in order to protect his people. And so you look at America, God is using America to protect the nation of Israel. All the president has to do is send out a tweet that says, we're going to stand with Israel. If you mess with Israel, we're coming for you. And things will get calm very quickly. We were talking about, that's how we started the show, talking about Israel. So let's get back into protecting Israel. So whenever you look at these 300 missiles and drones that were sent to Israel. What was fascinating about that is, as I was reading, was that one missile hit a target out of all 300. I think one hit a target. And I could be wrong, and I don't know what the latest is, but that's what I read.
I did see some footage that makes me pause at that.
Okay, was there more than one?
I think there might have been, yeah.
Okay.
So I can't confirm that either, but trying to keep up with this story, it's been absolutely wild. It changes. It shifts, but I was seeing some footage just yesterday that seemed to show that, there were maybe not 99% of these missiles were stopped. But,
okay, so there was a few.
But the vast majority.
Maybe a few got in, and so then you had one young lady that I know of that got injured. Maybe a 10-year-old girl is what I read. It could be more than that now. And but like you said, those numbers are changing. But whenever you look at the Iron Dome and those Patriot missiles, I read a story where I think it was in Desert Storm, whenever those missiles were first implemented, that you had these missiles coming in and these Patriot missiles going up and taking out these missiles that were coming in to destroy Israel. And you had Israeli people in the streets waving American flags, singing "God Bless America."
Wow.
That gives me chill bumps even thinking about that.
How many Americans could we get to do that?
Oh, a great day in the morning.
I mean, I see people in Seattle and Portland waving communist flags.
Unbelievable. What they are to do is take those, what they are to do, let me be real Christian about this and calm down. What they are to do is take those people and send them to a communistic country and let's see how much they enjoy that.
Yeah, let's see how long they last.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so they're not going to last very long before they're willing to come back to America. They could just land. I've been to a lot of countries in my lifetime, a lot of countries, and I've been to a few. I've been to several different places, and it's different. I mean, it is different. I mean, it feels different. I mean, just I'll never forget this one particular place that I went to in Mexico, and it was way up in the mountains, and I was in there, and they had these, I don't want to call this one a witch doctor. There's a lot of those in Papua New Guinea maybe, but this wasn't, I'm going to call him a witch doctor, but he was very satanic. And it was in this village to where this particular individual had a lot of control over. And we were going to try to come in and preach the gospel and talk about Jesus. And he didn't want us there. And he threatened us. And there was some major threats and some things that came in. But I just remember the darkness, that was there. I remember in the Philippines, I was in a particular village, same thing. And just the darkness, that come upon us. And it was controlled by Muslims. And they said, if you're here at night, they'll kill you. You have to come during the day, and then they'll be with you. These Christians are to protect you. And I'll never forget, we drove several hours up into the mountains in the Philippines to go preach into the particular village that was being controlled by Muslims who hated Americans.
Right.
And so we were there. And of course, we had guards with us, but just feeling that satanic oppression was just unbelievable.
It's like something in the air, right? I mean, it's just oppressive.
Absolutely. I remember being in Japan, and just even Japan. I mean, just feeling that same thing. Just that religion, that religious oppression, that comes from not having freedom of religion. And I've been to several other countries where I felt the same thing. That's what it makes me. God bless America. I'm thankful that I get to live in the United States of America, the greatest country, in my opinion, in the world. And but whenever you look at all of that in a whole, it goes back to, I believe that is one reason why God has blessed our country so much, is that protection of Israel, that protection of getting the gospel out, that protection of just being free, just being free. And so going back to Israel, waving the American flag and singing "God Bless America," that's in my opinion, that's good for America. I mean, that's what you want. You want Israel waving American flag, singing "God Bless America." On the same token, in Iran, what are they doing?
Well, the exact opposite. They're not waving American flags, I can promise you.
No, they're burning
unless
them.
They want to be in prison for 20 years or the rest of their life.
Yeah,
or dead.
Yeah, absolutely. They're burning the American flag. And you mentioned about some of these people in some of these states here. You even have some of these uneducated, consider them uneducated. They've listened to somebody like, Soros, or they listen to somebody like Hillary Clinton, or they've listened to somebody like Nancy Pelosi, talk about how America, is, oppressing people, and America is a place of oppression. Well, if America is such a place of oppression, I got a question for you. How come we have thousands of people trying to get here from all over the world? How come here in America we have literally tens of thousands of people trying to get here illegally? I mean, they're not even waiting to come legally. They're trying to get in illegal. I mean, they just want to get to America. Why? Because it's a land of opportunity. It's a land of freedom. It's a land where they know that they can find a job, where they can get food. It's a land of, where they can raise their family and not be concerned about, the drug cartel, trying to kill their family. So I understand why people want to come to America. How come we're not having the same problem with people leaving America?
Well, yeah, nobody ever fled South Korea for North Korea, right?
No.
Nobody ever fled West Germany for East Germany.
No, that's right. Yeah. You don't see nobody. That's a great example, South Korea, North Korea. How many people are risking their life to get to North Korea?
None that I know of. Yeah. No sane person, that's for sure.
That's unbelievable. Nobody's doing that. Who's going to risk their life to try to flee America unless they're a criminal, like they're in trouble, running from the law. I'm not going to take my family and go try to cross some river that's got a bunch of crocodiles in it, and to try to get them into Mexico. I'm not doing that. I'm staying right here where I'm at, and that goes back to God has blessed our country so much. And I believe it goes back to that ties to God bless America because America has blessed Israel. And I believe that is so important as far as our country. I like what Ronald Reagan said. Ronald Reagan said, the United States has unshakable commitment to Israel's security and well-being. I've got a question. You know more history than me. Back whenever Ronald Reagan was president, when he became president, were things good?
Yes.
Whenever he was president, things were great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
For 4 years.
He was one of the finer presidents we've had over the last 100 years.
Yep. Then he had 8 years. He was there for 8 years. My favorite commercial. Have you seen this commercial? It's Morning Again. Our morning is coming in America.
Yep.
It's a great.
That's one of the more famous, political commercials.
Great commercial. When Ronald Reagan was president, how was it in Israel?
It was good.
It was good.
Things were good.
Was Iran shooting? I wonder if Iran was trying to shoot a bunch of missiles into Israel.
Not that I recall. Maybe I skipped a couple pages in history, but I don't think that ever happened.
Yeah, I think I read a story to where one of those countries over there had some Americans, and they were released before Ronald Reagan even was sworn in.
Yeah.
Did I recall that? It was part of
this country that starts with an A and ends with Iran, right?
Yeah. So my point is, when you have a strong president, it brings peace. It brings peace. And whenever you have a guy like Joe Biden, who doesn't even know what day of the week it is, that's why you're going to have so much turmoil happening all around the globe, is because you have a man, that is weak. I don't believe he's even the one running the country. I believe that he has other people full of his strengths. And so I believe that is true. Donald Trump said this. Donald Trump said, for the small nation of Israel, it's been a long and remarkable journey. Through centuries of exile and persecution, unmatched courage and survival, the Jewish people have truly endured. And Donald Trump is right whenever he says that. And his loyalty and his commitment to Israel is like none other. I believe as far as when you look at presidents, you probably have to go back to Ronald Reagan, and then you have to go back a long time even before him. But that commitment, and a lot of them, they talk about, we're going to support Israel. But Donald Trump's commitment was far superior than others. And I go back to him willing to move the embassy to Jerusalem and to claim that as the capital of Israel. That is being committed. And that is, in my opinion, that is unmatched by any other president, is what Donald Trump did, by moving that embassy. But I will say this, Reed. I will say this. Whenever you look at, the nation of Israel and how, here's what it gets to. I believe we should support Israel. Right?
Right.
You would agree with me that we should support Israel.
But what does that look like? That's
Correct.
A very different question.
That is where a lot of people want to argue and disagree on. Okay, how
that's fine. I think that there is room for disagreement with that question as long as we accept that some degree of support for Israel amidst this crisis is necessary.
Absolutely. It's like, okay, it goes back to Ukraine and Russia. Now, you might disagree with me on this, and I don't know where you stand because I didn't ask you, so I have no idea where you stand with Ukraine and Russia. But in my personal opinion, we need to stay away from that.
Yes.
In my opinion.
Yes.
I don't believe we need to
send a money laundering
there.
operation.
It's 100% money laundering. 100%. If we're going to send money to Ukraine, like, it doesn't need to be, okay, if we're going to do it. Now, I'm not even for it, but if we're going to do it, it needs to be reimbursement for things that they have bought and paid for. It does not need to be, we're just going to give you $80 billion and let you go do with it whatever you want. That's ridiculous.
Have you seen Vladimir Zelensky's persecution of the Orthodox Church?
No, it's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
We should not be.
We cannot be backing regimes like that.
Absolutely not.
There's precisely one country where U.S. tax dollars should be going, and that's the United States of America. That's my opinion. I'm America first, right? But, supporting countries that are shutting down the church, that are persecuting the church, totally unacceptable. That's why, I stand by what I said in episode 1 of this show. I believe the Biden administration is a satanic administration. I actually do. I think they're an instrument of evil.
So when you look at Ukraine and Russia, Dan's opinion, they're at war. We're not. We don't need to send our men and women over there to fight in a war with Russia and Ukraine. I don't believe we even need to send money to Ukraine. If we are going to, it needs to be a reimbursement. It does not need to be, we're going to give you a blank check. And so whenever I see what the speaker's even doing right now and see what some of the people are doing, and there are probably a lot of people in D.C. would disagree with me, but that's fine. I'm okay with you disagreeing with me. I like the fact that I can have my own opinion on this simple fact, whenever it comes to the nation of Ukraine. But there has to be oversight on what's happening. There has to be some accountability on the money and where it is going. Because I agree that it is a money laundering. It's just going to make it right back into the Democrat Party.
Right.
That's exactly what it's going to do. It's going to make its way right back into Joe Biden's pockets or his son's pocket.
Yep.
Is where it's going to end up. But when it comes to the nation of Israel, now I have a little different mindset when it comes to the nation of Israel. Now, let me just say this, and we'll see where you and I align on this, but I don't believe we are to send troops to Israel.
No, absolutely not.
I don't believe that we are to send our military to Israel. Now, my brother's in the Marines, and he has been the last 6 months. He has not been in Israel. He has not been on the ground in Israel, but he has been on a ship that's been out in the Red Sea. And what they've been doing, and this is what's so great about our military. Them boys can be sitting thousands of miles away. They can be watching a radar. They can see a missile coming toward Israel. They can hit a button that will send another missile and hit that missile, knock it out of the sky. I'm for that all day. Like, I'm okay with that. But as far as sending our troops on the ground with guns and fighting in a war, I'm not for that. Now, I'm not opposed to sending missiles to Israel. I'm not opposed to supporting the Iron Dome in Israel. I'm perfectly okay with that. I think whatever Israel needs as far as missiles, I'm for sending it. Whatever Israel needs as far as bullets, I'm send it. Whatever Israel needs whenever it comes to if they need planes, I'm for it. Send them planes. Whatever they need in that aspect, I am for it 100% sending Israel any and everything that they need. What Israel needs more than anything is for people to stay out of their way. That's what they need. They just need people to stay out of their way. They have one of the strongest militaries in the world.
Absolutely.
I mean, they have a strong fighting force. They don't, listen, I say this respectfully for the nation of Israel. They don't necessarily need our men and women over there. They don't need that. They need people to stay out of their way. They need America to say, you know what, Israel, you have every right as a country to retaliate against Hamas. Hamas comes in, they kill your people, they murder your women, they're raping your children. Send every one of those suckers where they belong.
Yep.
Send them to meet their maker. Go after it. You have every right to do that. They don't need America. They don't need Joe Biden up there saying, we need a ceasefire. They don't need Joe Biden up there saying, be careful. We wasn't saying that whenever 9/11 happened. Whenever 9/11 happened here in America, and George Bush, one of the greatest speeches, and I'm getting chill bumps even thinking about it, whenever George Bush stood out there at 9/11, the Twin Towers, and he was standing there, he had that mic in his hand, and he said this. George Bush said, he says, I hear you, talking to the American people. And he says, the world hears you. And then he said, the people that took down these buildings, they're going to hear from all of us. And what he was meaning, whenever he said that was, we're going to send them to meet their maker. That's where we're going to send them. And so, whenever you look at that, and we were go after them, that's what we were saying. At least that's what I was saying. I'll never forget where I was at, as far as being in college in Memphis. Yeah, whenever George Bush, he stood there and he said, the world hears us, or the world hears you. And those people that tore down these buildings are going to hear from us. That was one of the most unbelievable speeches that I heard as far as George Bush. Whenever you look at when Hamas come in, and that was really their 9/11. Whenever Hamas came in and caused all of those issues,
October 7th.
Yeah, Israel has every right to retaliate. And for anyone to be calling for you have to be careful. What you do. No, you go after those people, blow up those tunnels. Do everything that you possibly have to do to protect your country. That's what we would do. That's what we did as the United States of America. And Israel has every right to do that. And when you go back and look, okay, so what should we be sending them? I'm for sending them anything they need. I don't want to send our troops. I don't want to send our men and women over there to go fight on the ground. Now, when it comes to missiles, when it comes to planes, whenever it comes to drones, I'm for sending those things 100%. But I'm not for sending our troops. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that whenever it comes to what you said about Hamas and Hezbollah, it is pretty important to bring up their tactics. So it is a very common tactic. You might remember there was a war between Hezbollah and Israel back in 2008, in which Hezbollah abducted several Israeli soldiers, and they were intentionally placing the hostages among great numbers of civilians in order to ensure massive numbers of Lebanese casualties. Let me explain that in a different way. So Hezbollah, the terrorist force in Lebanon, was actually placing its own civilians in harm's way in order to either prevent Israel from being able to drop bombs or forcing Israel to kill civilians in order to get its hostages back. This is a really despicable and disgusting terrorist tactic used by Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, right? So these are people who are not afraid to ensure massive numbers of deaths among their own civilians, among their own women and children, if it means forcing Israel to make a very tough decision, right? So after the Hezbollah and Israel war, what happened was Israel ended up killing many civilians in order to get they ended up killing a lot of Lebanese civilians in order to get their hostages back. What this generated was a large international outcry against Israel. I'm not sure if maybe you remember that. So I think understanding a little bit of the tactics and the mindset of just how evil these terrorists are, that's probably good. I think maybe that's why people might encourage a little bit of a measured, approach in terms of how Israel needs to respond in certain ways. Because Hamas and Hezbollah, they force Israel to commit mass numbers of civilian casualties, anticipating that Israel will face criticism from the so-called international community after the fact. So, these are people with a very different philosophy in terms of they don't value human life. They don't even value the lives of their own people. They're all women and children. They're willing to sacrifice as many of their own women and children as they need in order to keep their fight against Israel going, right? So I think it's important to take into account those kinds of the tactical history of the kinds of enemies that are around Israel. Now, whenever we talk about Hamas and Hezbollah, something else they have in mind is that they are both backed by the Iranian government, by the Islamic State. We were talking a little while ago, and that was a great conversation about just how evil and wicked the so-called Islamic Republic of Iran is. They might be the chief sponsor of terrorism around the world.
Absolutely.
Which just earlier this month, this was just a little over a week ago now, there was actually in Argentina, of all places, an Argentinian court ruled that a bombing in 1994 in which 85 people were killed in a Jewish community in Buenos Aires, Argentina, that bombing was in fact a result of the government of Iran. That in 1994, the government of Iran orchestrated a bombing in Buenos Aires, Argentina, killing 85 people in a Jewish community. Their hatred for the Jewish people was not limited to the country of Israel, to this small territory, not even the size of the state of Mississippi in the Middle East. Their hatred for Israel is something that's global. And I think just understanding, just how twisted the mindset is of this enemy, I think that's pretty critical in terms of how we maybe judge Israel's response to its enemies. And it's just as important as we ask what our role should look like as we're helping the country of Israel.
Yeah, I agree. A while ago you mentioned the CIA, and I just thought about this whenever you mentioned.
They're gonna love this discussion.
Yeah. Well, whenever you mentioned the,
I'm gonna have like black vans outside my house when I'm driving home. It's gonna be great.
So you mentioned 1990s, and it reminded me when you're talking about the government setting up, the CIA setting up to overthrow, talking about Iran. Well, who set up Osama bin Laden?
Our government did. Our government did.
And I thought about that after I was speaking about George Bush, and then I started thinking about that man. But yeah, our government set them up. So which is
in the 1980s. I think this is maybe one area where I'm a little bit critical of Reagan, although my views of Reagan are almost all positive. The 1980s, we were arming the Mujahideen fighters. They're right. So that they could fight the Soviet Union. What did the Mujahideen become? They became Al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
We trained and armed the Mujahideen, right, who became Al-Qaeda, our great enemy, the orchestrators of 9/11 later. If you want to look at who our enemies are going to be in 10 years, just look at who we're giving money to today.
That's right. No, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right on. And so that's so who are we giving money to today? We need to start keeping up with that. And so we need to go look and see who where our support is going. So it's incredible whenever you really think about it and you see what's happening and what's going on. Back to Hamas, there was just several weeks ago, remember the explosion at the hospital? Yeah. They had an explosion and they were blaming it on Israel, but come to find out it was one of their own missiles.
Right. It misfired, right?
Yeah, misfired. I think it went off and it blow it up in the hospital, killing
Killed a lot of
civilians.
people. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so now, whenever it comes to war, you know, it's a sad thing, but unfortunately, a lot of people die in a war. When there's a war, people die, and that's not a good thing. There's bombs dropped, missiles are dropped, ships are sunk, you know, planes. I remember back when it was at Iran, who maybe in the 1980s, whenever Iran threatened one of our ships and we sunk like half of their navy, I think it was. I mean, it happens in war. But one of the things that you don't want to do is you don't want civilians to die, right? You want to try to limit that as much as possible.
Absolutely.
And so you don't want to kill innocent people, innocent women, innocent children, you know, because of a bunch of terrorists. And so I do think that we have to be as careful as we can be. I know Israel, whenever they would go bomb a particular place, they would drop leaflets out, you know, warning the people, hey, look, you need to get out. You know, you need to leave. I know whenever they went in, you know, to Palestine, they gave the people warning. And they said, y'all need to go. You got to get out of here because we're about to unleash hell, you know, because of what Hamas did. And so Israel does really good whenever it comes to trying to warn the people that were coming. But when you look at terrorists, you know, like you talked about a while ago, they don't care about even their own family.
Absolutely.
They don't care about their own children. I mean, they want to strap bombs to their own children and let them blow up themselves and blow up other people. And they say, well, if you do that, then you're going to inherit a kingdom. You're going to inherit a planet with 70 virgins on it. That's what they believe. They believe that those men, whenever they flew those planes into the Twin Towers, they believed that whenever they died, that they were going to wake up on some planet and have 70 virgins.
Right.
But the reality of it is they didn't wake up on some planet.
No.
No virgins waiting.
There weren't any virgins waiting on them.
They woke up in hell, and that's a bad thing. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody, you know, not even my worst enemy, because it's for all eternity. It's forever. And so whenever you look at these wars and you look at all of these battles, I was talking to a gentleman today about World War II, and we were talking about whenever they dropped, you know, the atomic bomb, you know, and I was thinking about my wife's grandpa, you know, who has a Congressional, you know, Medal of Honor, you know, from being on the USS Indianapolis. Have you seen or read the book on the USS Indianapolis?
I have not.
There's a movie out there. You ought to watch it. My wife's grandpa, Granville Crane, was on the USS Indianapolis. And it had, at the time, they didn't know what it was, but there was some crates that was on their ship in the captain's quarters. And there was some Marines that was protecting, you know, those crates. And it had the instruments or the things that they needed for that bomb. And when they took those bombs and they were disassembled and they put them together and they flew them into Japan, dropped those bombs, and of course ended World War II. Jackie's grandpa was on that USS Indianapolis as it carried those 2 atomic bombs over into the Pacific Ocean. On their way back, there was a Japanese submarine that followed that ship, the USS Indianapolis, and torpedoed that ship and sunk it. Jackie's grandpa was on there, and he would have a Bible study in the evening time, and he asked the Captain McVeigh, can we have a Bible study? Can we stay up on the top deck? And so he let them, and so they would sleep up there. And so that's the only reason why he made it out alive, because he was on the top deck. The torpedo hit this ship, sunk this ship in a matter of minutes. There was over 1,200. It was the largest casualty in Navy history. Over 800 men and women lost their life. There was over 1,200 men and women on that ship. He spent 5 days in the ocean. 5 days. He lost his arm while he was there. He saw many of his friends they had eaten by sharks while they was in the Pacific Ocean. He surrendered to preach in the Pacific Ocean as he was waiting on help. The only reason why they even got help was because there was another plane that was flying around that was having engine trouble, and it came to a low altitude, and he saw oil slick on the ocean floor, on the top of the ocean. And so then he saw men, what he looked like men. He didn't know who they were, but they was because they was men from the USS Indianapolis. And so he landed that plane in the water. And Jackie's grandpa said, you know, even whenever he landed the plane, people would try to swim to the airplane, and some of them even drowned because they had lost, you know, so much of their energy trying to get to that plane. And so whenever you look at that and you see our love for freedom, our love for liberty, our love for one another, our love for our friends and family, and then you look at Hamas, a terrorist organization who is willing to sacrifice their own people. They are willing to take children and use them as shields. I mean, that's what they're willing to do. They are willing to let a little 5, 6-year-old girl die, a little 5, 6-year-old boy die, for their cause, which is just terrorism. That's all it is. It's just terrorism. Now, I know this probably isn't very good Christian of me, but whenever it comes to terrorists, it's time they meet their maker. It's time they meet their maker. And I don't like to say that, because it's hard, because I understand what happens whenever a person dies, and hell's for all eternity and heaven's for all eternity. But if you have these people out there that are terrorists, like the Hamas and all these other terrorist organizations and these terrorist groups, and they're trying to wreak havoc on these countries, and they're trying to kill these women and children and these men, somebody needs to send them to meet their maker.
Well, there is a such thing as righteous anger.
Absolutely.
Like, taking another person's life is not always inherently sinful, depending on the surrounding circumstances, right?
That's right.
I think, you're spot on with everything you just said. Whenever it comes to the situation of Iran specifically, this chief sponsor of terrorism in the world, I think we have to differentiate between the Iranian government and the Iranian people. The people of Iran, they're people just like us. The everyday people in Iran, moms, pops, families, these are people who are being held hostage by their government. They've been terrorized by a government that took control of their country in 1979. The actions of their government are not necessarily representative of them. I mean, I know a lot of Iranian people. They're very good people. They're people who value family as much as we do. Governments are not always representative of the people that they govern over. I mean, can we hold all of North Korea accountable for what, Kim Jong-un is up to? No, I think that, you have to differentiate between people and their governments. I imagine if people held us accountable for every stupid thing that Joe Biden did, or Barack Obama, or any number of other horrible presidents we had, right? Anytime there's war, there are going to be massive numbers of casualties. And one thing I do worry about whenever we talk about how we assist Israel is when we talk about, sending them certain numbers of weapons, if we're not careful, this can be an escalation towards total war, in which where we're forced to put boots on the ground, even more boots on the ground in the Middle East than we have over the last several decades. That's something that obviously I caution against, being an inherently America first and anti-war person. But does that mean that we withdraw ourselves from the situation completely? No, of course not.
Reed, I've enjoyed the conversation today. It's been good. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks for watching. If you watch this on Twitter, regardless of whatever social media platform you have watched, please share. Please share God and Country. It helps us with the algorithm. It helps us get out our message. Once again, Reed, thanks for joining. God bless you, and God bless the great United States of America.
Thank you, Dan. God bless. Hey guys, it's Reed here. I don't say this about a lot of people, but I have to say Mike Lindell is a real patriot, and we could not be more thankful to him and MyPillow for sponsoring today's episode of God and Country. Remember, go to MyPillow.com and save huge on a great night of sleep by entering the promo code Midnight Ride. Thanks.